I'd like to thank Chazaq for sponsoring this event, and especially Torah Anytime for spreading Torah, being Marbitz Torah, and for spreading this event worldwide. I'd also like to thank my good friend Missanel Epstein for personally recording this wonderful shiur. I'd like to speak about that in Sfiras HaOmer we're not just going to be counting the days, we want to make all the days count. And we know that in the whole idea of Sfiras HaOmer, of making the days count, has to do with, even though it's after Lag BaOmer, and some people think that that's it, but that's not really true. The Omer continues. And the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, who we have to always be aware of, we have to remember what exactly is the meaning of the Sfira. And the idea that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva unfortunately passed away, Shelo Nagu Kavod Zeh B'Zeh, they didn't treat each other with respect. Rabbi Akiva, who was the greatest of the Tana who said, "V'havta l'reacha kamocha," Zeh klal gadol b'Torah, you should love your fellow Jew as yourself. This is the greatest klal, the greatest law in the Torah. But nevertheless, his Talmidim lo nagu kavod zeh b'zeh, they didn't treat each other with respect. So what does that exactly mean? That the students of the Rabbi Akiva didn't treat each other with respect. So lo nagu kavod zeh b'zeh, they didn't show each other respect. Meaning even if they disagreed, even if a person, you're allowed to disagree. You're always allowed to disagree. The Gemara is full of disagreements. But there's a way you disagree. And unfortunately, we find that apparently they were somewhat, on their level of course, on their level they were somewhat dismissive of each other. That they didn't take the opinion of the other side and think perhaps there's something I can learn from there, something I can gain from there. Rather, unfortunately, just the opposite. They were just focused on their own opinion and dismissive of the other person's opinion. It's brought down in the name of Rabbi Kotler, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, the famous Klatzk Rosh Yeshiva, and then the Rosh Yeshiva in Lakewood, New Jersey. He said, when you're involved in learning Torah, so people know you have to say over Torah well, say over something. Rabbi would say you also have to listen. Listening to the other person is just as important as saying over your own opinion. In some ways, listening is more important. To listen to the other person, to see what you can gain from what they're saying, of the points that they're bringing out, how it can improve your points. That's such an important thing, and that involves what? That involves giving someone a sense of kavod, showing a person respect, not being dismissive of the other person, but rather having respect for the other person. It's interesting that Lag BaOmer this year, which was Erev Shabbos, Parshas Emor, so we find in Parshas Emor, the very end of Parshas Emor, it tells us a story, even though most of Emor is about laws of Kohanim and other halachas. But then the Torah tells us that Vayetze ben Ish Yisraelis v'hu ben Ish Mitzri. It tells us a story about a man who was the son of a Yisraeli, a Jewish woman, but his father was a Mitzri, was a non-Jew. And there was a fight. There was some sort of argument. There was a fight. There was a fight went on, an argument, a machlokes went on in the Machane. Between who? Bein Yisraelis, between a man who is the son of Yisraelis, v'Ish Yisraeli, the man who was son of the Israelis woman, and the man who's just a total Ish Yisraeli. What's interesting is that the Torah tells us they were fighting in the camp. So the Shaila, of course, is, what were they fighting about? What are they fighting about? But the Torah never tells us. The Torah never tells us anywhere what they were fighting about. We know there are various Chazal, of course, give different opinions of what they were fighting about. Whatever, they were fighting over where he should live, where he should stay. There are many, many different opinions of what they were fighting about. But the Torah itself, interestingly enough, goes out of its way to tell us that there was a fight. I mean, the Torah could have just said that a person, eventually the Ben Mitzri went ahead and unfortunately blasphemized, was Mekalel Hashem. He's called the Mekalel. They could have just started from there. Why does the Torah make a point of telling us there was a machlokes, there was a fight, but it doesn't tell us what the fight was about? So we find that in the Mechilta tells us, the Mechilta, the Rabbi Yishmael Bar Yochai, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, what can be more beautiful, especially after Lag BaOmer, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Talmud Muvak, Rabbi Kiva, on the pasuk in Shmos Ki Yirivuna Anoshim, when there's a fight between people. So the Mechilta, the Rashbi says, Ein davar tov yotze mitoich meriva. Out of fight, nothing ever comes good. When there's a machlokes, when it comes to a machlokes, when it comes to a fight, nothing good can come out of that. And the Mechilta says, "Ki yirivuna noshe," when people are fighting, betchila boim lidei matzo. They come, as it says here, vayinatzu bachna. There's an argument, and then the argument escalates lidei makos, to physical hitting. And finally, the physical hitting, boim lidei unsh, and then a person can eventually going to be killed, or eventually there'll be a terrible punishment. And that's what happened with the Talmidim, unfortunately, of Rabbi Akiva. Of course, people can have a civil dispute. We're very pro. We're not monolithic. We're not a chas v'shalom. We encourage people to share their thoughts, their chidushim. That's what learning Torah is all about. But on the other hand, it has to be done in a civil way, in a way which we show respect, in a way which we show kavod for each other. And the idea of showing kavod with each other means to maintaining shalom with each other. The maintenance of shalom with each other in our community, in our shuls, in our homes, with our friends, that's the most critical thing that we have to learn to make the days count. If we really want to make the days count, the way to make the days count is to be mar b'shalom, unfortunately, the students of Rabbi Akiva was a period. It was, unfortunately, they split apart. They split into different factions, and each person was for themselves. And unfortunately, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Chas V'Shalom, can't stand when this period. We know, of course, that even those who blasphemized, the Dor HaFlaga, the generation of the dispersed people. But as we know, Chazal tell us, but they were at least unified. They were b'shalom. They got along with each other. So even though they blasphemized, they weren't killed out. As opposed to, unfortunately, we know the Dor HaMabul. The Dor HaMabul, they were people. The generation of the flood. These were people who were constantly in dispute and machlokes with each other, and therefore they were totally wiped out. So the ways to make the days count is to avoid machlokes and to be mar b'shalom, to avoid any dispute, to avoid any arguments, to avoid schisms in the Jewish people, and to create shalom, to create peace. Especially now, especially time at this point, there were so many different opinions of different people, different communities, how we would act during COVID, this way, that way. So now is the time, especially now, is the time to come together, to group together, to have achdus, to have unity, to have shalom. It's amazing, the last Mishnah in all of Shas, is Masechta Uktzin, Perek Gimel Mishnah Yud Beis. Famous Mishnah, it says, Amr B'Shuv ben Levi, Osi HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'anchil L'chol Tzadik V'Tzadik Shalosh Me'os V'Asara Olamos. It says eventually HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to give to every tzaddik 310 Olamos, 310 world, a great, great gift. And it quotes the pasuk in Mishnah, L'hanchil O'avai Yesh, I'm going to give to those who love me, I'm going to give them yesh. Yesh, of course, in Gematria is 310. And then the Mishnah ends off, the Reb Shimon ben Chalafta teaches us that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to give a blessing, where does he find that he'll put the bracha? Where is the bracha? Where is the bracha going to be held? Where should it be placed? So it says in the Mishnah, Motza HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kli Machzik Bracha Yisrael Ela Shalom. I mean, in what receptacle do you place the bracha? You have flowers. Where are you going to put the flowers? You have to put them in the most beautiful place, the most fitting place for the flowers. You're not going to put the flowers on a tray. You're not going to put the flowers in a basket. You have to have a beautiful vase. That's where the flowers belong. So too, Hashem wants to give His bracha. Where is He going to put it? Where is He going to put it? Which keli? Which receptacle? So that says the Mishnah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu couldn't find a greater receptacle than shalom, than the idea of peace, shalom. When there's shalom in Klal Yisrael, when there's shalom in Klal Yisrael, that when the shalom exists, Hashem's bracha is present, Hashem's bracha is there, He places His bracha, we feel His bracha, we benefit from His bracha. But I just have to end with the words of the Tiferes Yisrael. The Tiferes Yisrael, one of the classical Mefarshim on the Mishnah, tells us, it says, but who am I? Who am I? It says this is only l'chol tzaddik v'tzaddik. The great righteous people, okay, Reb Chaim Kanievsky should live and be well. Great tzaddikim, these are people who are going to get these 310 olamas. But who am I? How do I compare? Says the Tiferes Yisrael, no. If you're a person, afilu tzaddik she'eno gomor, you're not a total tzaddik. But Oisik b'Torah b'chol zman she'efshar. You listen to Torah when you can. You go on Torah anytime. You listen on Chazaq. You listen to a shiur when you can. When you can. U'makayim mitzvah, saying you do the mitzvahs best you can. And even he says, even lefamim nichshal. Sometimes you slip up. Sometimes you slip up omis rashal, or sometimes you're lazy. Ve'enu nizar, sometimes we're not so careful how we make a bracha. Sometimes we're not so careful exactly when we daven, how we daven. L'kayem mitzvosei kirui. We're human. Nevertheless, says the Tifer Yisrael, Afal pichen lo yovilu hamalachim shin yud bo'olam haba. You'll still get your 310. You'll still get the bracha of the 310 worlds in the next world, which is, by the way, besides the great Tova that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be mashpia on us in Olam Hazeh. If what? Imrak yesh shalom b'ma'ono v'im chaveiro. Says the Tifer Yisrael, if you have shalom in your house, b'ma'ono, in your house, and you have shalom with your friends, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the receptacle is present. Once the receptacle is present, Hashem says, okay, you don't always daven so great. Okay, you miss a bracha once in a while. Okay, you don't learn maybe as much as you can. Oh, but you maintain shalom in your house. You maintain shalom with your friends. You make shalom at work. You keep shalom in the shul. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, there's shalom present. Now you get my bracha, the beautiful bracha, the shefa in this world, and the 310 bracha worlds in the next world as well. So therefore, let's make these days count. Let's make these days count by each day trying to be marba shalom, bringing a sense of shalom, of unity, of achdus, of togetherness. And by doing so, Be'ezus Hashem will truly be zocha and privileged to Kabbalas HaTorah.
I've come to speak about the terrible, unimaginable, incomprehensible tragedy that took place on Yom Hilulot de Rav Shimon bar Yochai, the day of Rav Shimon bar Yochai's yahrzeit, a day that has been set down for generations as a day of celebration. At the passing of Rav Shimon bar Yochai, because on the day of his passing, Chazal tell us that he revealed so much hidden Torah to his students, and of course then to Klal Yisrael for the generations. And we celebrate the light of that Torah. And it's an incredible place of celebration. And on that very day, in the midst of celebration, amidst the Kedusha, the holiness of the day, a terrible, incomprehensible tragedy, and the loss of 45 Kedoshim v'Tahorim. And Klal Yisrael is suffering, Klal Yisrael is in pain, our eyes are wet with tears, our hearts are broken, and struggling to try to cope and to understand. And that's what this evening is about. First and foremost, I think the message is to understand that it is something that is incomprehensible for the human mind. The greatest of our scholars, the greatest of our Talmidei Chachamim throughout the ages have always tried to understand why terrible tragedies happen. And that message and that answer is hidden only to be revealed to us Be'Eliyahu Navi and Mashiach, that should happen speedily in our day. David HaMelech in Tehillim explains in a pasuk describing both the righteousness and the judgment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says, Tzidkoscha k'harayel, u'mishpatecha tahom rabba. Your righteousness, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is like the top of a mountain. What does that mean? Says the Medrash, if you want to look at the top of a mountain, and you stand at the foot of the mountain, you can't see the top, you can't see the peak. But if you step back, and the further back you go, sometimes hundreds of miles away, you have a better grasp, better vision of the height of this mountain. Be able to see the top of the peak of the mountain. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's righteousness, we often don't see when it happens. We often don't see it a year, 10 years, 100 years in that generation. But as we span generations and we take a look from a distance, we just are in awe of the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's righteousness. However, says David HaMelech, u'mishpatecha tahom rabbah. Your mishpat, your din, your judgment, is like the depth of the sea. No one has been able to understand, to get a glimpse of what is doing in the depths of the sea. There are places in the world that have been unable to be conquered by man, even in this incredible age of wisdom and technology and advancement, of what goes on in the depths of the Tehom, of the deepest part of the ocean, which is all black. That is the way to understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's judgment, which means it's incomprehensible, can't be explained. The Vilna Gaon gives an incredible mashal, a parable, to explain one of the most difficult midrashim that we have in our medrash, that we actually refer to every year, twice a year, during the Kinos on Tisha B'Av and on the Musaf on Yom Kippur, on the holiest day of the year, when we refer to the Asara Arugei Malchus, the death of the 10 greatest Tanoim, men of the Mishnah, who were put to death in such horrific manner. And at the death, the brutal death, killing of Rabbi Akiva, that holy sage, the Rabbi of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, when he was burnt to death and suffering the last moments of his life, says the Medrash that the Malachi Hashem, the angels in Shamayim turned to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and asked him, Zusayr of Zuschar, is this the reward for Torah? This is the greatest Torah scholar, the greatest group of Torah scholars. This is the reward for such scholarship, for such greatness, who reached the greatest heights. Moshe Rabbeinu himself, when he saw B'Nevuah, Ruach HaKodesh, Rabbi Akiva giving a shir to his Talmidim, he was pained that he didn't understand the depth of Rabbi Akiva's shir, until Rabbi Akiva finally explained the source of his Torah is Halacha Moshe Misinai, and Moshe was pacified. At his death, such a brutal death, Zusar v'Zuschar, the Malachim themselves didn't understand the celestial angels. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds to them to stop their questions, to stop their shouts of Zusar v'Zuschar, because if HaKadosh Baruch Hu continues to hear them, he's going to turn the world back, l'so avo, destroy the world to the beginning of creation. And begs the question, we understand that man doesn't understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's judgment, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ways, but the Malachim, why can't they understand? Why doesn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu answer them? Why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu push them off and say, if you continue asking, I'll destroy the world, bring it back to the beginning before Bereshis Bara Elokim, for Brias HaOlam. Says the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is answering them, but he's answering them. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu is answering them, he explains B'derech Mashal. There was once a poritz, a governor of a province in Europe, who was a very cruel tax collector, and the Jews suffered terribly under his rule. And he would collect the taxes from the Jews without mercy and then send it to the king, making him look like an incredible, devoted follower of the king, and the king would reward him. And one day his wishes became true. He received a letter, a notification that the king wants to see him on the anniversary of his coronation, where a great festive banquet takes place. And the king wants to present him with a guest of honor award for all his dedication. And he was overjoyed. And he traveled to Italy to buy the most expensive material, to make himself in a special outfit, suit, befitting the guest of honor in the king's palace. And he asked who was the best tailor in town, and they told him there's this little Jew who has a small tailor shop. He's the best in the business. And he went to him and he brought him the material. It says, I will come back in 30 days. I want you to make me a suit, an outfit befitting the guest of honor in the king's palace. And he left the material by him, and he came back 30 days later, and he tries on the suit. It was an incredible, beautiful suit, never seen anything like it. And he goes home and shows it to his wife. Look at how beautiful I'm going to be dressed. And the wife, who has her love for Jews was equal to her husband's, And she said to him, look, it's a beautiful suit indeed, but where's the rest of the material, expensive material you bought? This is only part of the material. Where's the rest of the material? That Jew stole the rest of your material. He's going to sell it for a profit. And the poet is enraged and takes a suit and runs back to the tailor and says, where's the extra material? And the tailor says to him, sir, every ounce of material that I received that you gave me was made for that suit. There is no extra material. You're a liar, it can't be, you're a thief. I'm going to punish you. And finally the tailor sees he can't explain it to the poets, to the governor. He takes the suit, puts it on the table, takes out a scissors and begins to cut the suit, the pockets, the lapel, the back. What are you doing? You're ruining my suit. And he continues cutting and cutting and cutting. And finally, he lays out the material, removes the pockets and the sleeves and the cuffs, and all of a sudden he lays out the material and he shows him, you see, the material laid out here is exactly the material that you gave me to make your suit. Here it is. And the person says, now I see that you're an honest man, I see. But why did you have to cut up my suit? Why did you have to ruin it? And Taylor says to him, because I tried to explain to you and there was no way you could comprehend of what goes into making a suit. So I laid it out the way it was in the beginning. Before I started, now you can understand. Kadosh Baruch says, the Vilna Gaon, that's what HaKadosh Baruch was telling the Malachim. Even you celestial angels, you think you want to understand my judgment, you want to understand my ways, why I am doing this? For that, I have to turn the world back. You have to look back from the beginning of creation and look at the entire panoramic view of the history of Klal Yisrael. And then you'll understand full well why this has to happen. Only then will you understand. In order to understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ways, we need to go back to the beginning of creation, which of course is impossible to do. We can't even look back a day before or tomorrow. We have no vision to understand, and therefore understanding HaKadosh Baruch Hu's judgment, as painful and as cruel as seemingly that it is, we have no ability to understand. I recently wrote of a famous story of the Ramban, famed Ramban. Ramban had a young son who was so ill, and he davened for him, and it was to no avail. The doctor says he only has minutes left. He went over to his son and he gave him 2 pieces of paper. And he says, I want you, the first piece of paper where he had written down the holy names of Hashem. When you pass on and you go into the next world, I want you to give it to the angel that is guarding all the 6 gates of heaven. And you'll give him each one, you'll show him each of the gates, you'll show him this first piece of paper. And when you get to the 7th and final gate, you will show him the other piece of paper. And on that paper, the Ramban had written, why did this happen to me? And he gave it to his son, put it in his son's hand, and his son passed on. A few days later, his son appeared to his father in a dream, and he says, Abba, Father, I did exactly as you instructed. And I gave the name, the paper with all the shemos, I showed it to the angels, and I passed through all 6 gates. When I came to the 7th gate, I took out the other piece of paper, which asked the question of why did this happen to me? And I was about to give it to the angel, but there was no purpose, because I understand full well why it happened. There is no question where I am right now. There was no need for that for the paper for the 7th gate, this gate of understanding. The 45 holy martyrs, the Kedoshim V'Taharim that passed on, by now have no questions. Where they are, there are no questions. They understand full well why HaKadosh Baruch Hu did this. We who are left in this temporal world, we have no understanding. So what should we do? What we need to do is to do things l'zeicher nishmas, to do something here that we take upon ourselves. There will be a schus for the future neshamos, for the greatness, for the aliyas neshamos of these great kedoshim, though they're already by the kisei hakavod, by the heavenly throne, but we need to do things for them, for the neshama. And how do we do that? How do we do that? I think what's important is to look and to understand a famed pirush of the Seforno on a pasuk that we've probably heard and seen quoted since this happened again and again. When the Torah talks about the tragedy of Misas Shnei Bnei Aaron, also in a time of incredible celebration, Bnei Yisrael comes out of the Midbar. They go out of Mitzrayim, coming into the desert, into the Midbar. And they're waiting for the Torah to be given. And finally Moshe is instructed, before he passes on, to build a Mishkan, a tabernacle, a Mishkan where HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shechina would rest. V'yasali mikdash v'shachanti b'socham. Make for me a mikdash where I can dwell, where the Shechina could dwell, a place to dwell in this world. And they make the mikdash. It's completed, and Klal Yisrael prepares the 7 days of celebration, Shivas Yimei HaMiluim, the 7 days of celebration, and on the 8th day is going to be this incredible sanctification, dedication of the Mikdash. And the 2 sons of Aaron, who were great, Kedoshim Elyon, holy people, worthy to go and do the Avodah, and Aaron instructs them to go in. And they go in and they die with a celestial fire that comes down and consumes them. They died al Kiddush Hashem. And the Gemara offers several different reasons. What could they have done on their level that maybe would have warranted to receive a punishment? On their level, such a minor infraction that caused them to die al Kiddush Hashem on such an incredible festive moment of Klal Yisrael. And the pasuk says, when Aaron hears of their demise, Vayidom Aaron is silent, doesn't respond. And this has become historical. Every time a tragedy happens, Vayidom Aaron, there are no words. Silence sometimes is the only words. And this is in a celebration of Meron, a celebration of the Hilul D'Rashur B'Yechoy. On that very place, in the midst of the celebration, comes this tragedy, Vayidom Aaron. However, there is another response. Beyond Vayidom Aaron, we find that there's another reaction that David HaMelech says, which we say every day. David HaMelech says, L'man yidom, l'man yazamrecha v'lo edom. I will sing you praises to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I will not be silent. Sometimes there is a response to tragedy of silence, vayidom. And sometimes the response to tragedy, as David HaMelech experienced, it's l'man yazamrecha, I will sing your praises, Hashem, and I will not be silent. Why is there 2 different reactions? And I thought once to explain that maybe a personal terrible time, a personal terrible tragedy of the sons of Aaron is Vayidom Aaron. The reaction is silence. When it's a national tragedy, David HaMelech was the Melech. Whatever happened to David HaMelech was a national tragedy. And a national tragedy, we don't remain silent. We sing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's praises. We continue singing. How do we do that? By doing something very special. By doing something very special. We take something upon ourselves to show our devotion to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the midst of Mishpatecha Tom Rapa, in the midst of a Mishpat that we don't understand. In a time of Mishpat where we don't have an understanding. Only up there is there an understanding. By the 7th gate, there was no need to give. The Ramban's son didn't have to give that note with that question because the question no longer existed. But we have the question. In spite of our question, we continue doing, taking something upon ourselves to continue our avodah, to embellish our avodah, do something more. That is something that we take upon ourselves, and that's the Zmiros to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's one more thing. In Vayidom Aaron, I mentioned, there's a Sephroner that explains it's not silent. Yidom doesn't mean silence, but it means Misnachem, Nechama. What does that mean? Aaron was Misnachem. He was comforted. How can Aaron be comforted at such a tragedy of the loss of 2 of his 4 sons, who were so great? Moshe Rabbeinu says, Gedol mimeni mimecha, they were greater than you and I together. How was it supposed to be silence? What does it mean, Misnachem? Where is that Nechama? Maybe the Nechama explanation of that Nechama is where we do something special. Where something is done, as a Kiddush Hashem, Klal Yisrael began to improve their avodah when they heard of the tragedy. They said, if it happens to them, what could happen to us? And they began to become greater. And that Kiddush Hashem, when Aaron saw that, Vayidom, he was Misnachem, he was comforted. Look at that. Klal Yisrael grew as a result of it. Kiddush Hashem came out of it. That is the nechama. When we do something more now, we do something more, we're so pained, in our broken heart, with tears still coming down our cheeks, we take something upon ourselves. That is Kiddush Hashem. And there's no greater nechama to the family of these 45 Kadoshi Elyon, to know that Klal Yisrael is improving, we are improving as individuals, and collectively together. And that is the greatest nechama we could provide. I want to conclude with one personal bakasha, personal request. It tells us, the Chachmei Kabbalah tell us, that when we enter into Shabbos, what does our Shabbos look like? The way we enter Shabbos is the way the Queen of Shabbos, Shabbos Malchasa, greets us. If we're happy, Shabbos Malchasa is happy. If we're sad, Shabbos Malchasa comes in sad. Our Shabbos is based upon how we enter Shabbos. I was thinking so much about that Shabbos, the Shabbos after Meron, the Shabbos after it happened. What was that Shabbos like? What was that Shabbos like? Avelim, people came straight from going from Meron, going straight from the Avela, straight from hearing that their children, their fathers, their husbands died, and they went into Kedusha Shabbos. How did they go into Shabbos? With tears. The Queen Shabbos Malka entered with tears. She has tears. She has tears. She responded in tears to our tears. How can we go ahead and dry away the tears of Shabbos? I was thinking as follows, and maybe this I'll end with this. Maybe there's something to think about. I want to dry the tears of Shabbos. And the way to dry the tears of Shabbos is that we enter Shabbos maybe with something a little bit more special. We always run into Shabbos straight from Chol to Shabbos, straight from work, busy, doing whatever we're doing, shut off the computer, and we run into Shabbos. Run from work, no matter when Shabbos is, a late Shabbos, early Shabbos, winter, summer, we're running with a bahala, with confusion. And Shabbos, we enter with confusion. I want Klal Yisrael to enter with menucha. And so I want to start the following thing, and I'm going to start this the Shabbos after Shavuos. Shabbos after Shavuos. Join me. What I want to do is create a WhatsApp, which I've created called Ben Kodesh L'Chol, which will be a 4 or 5 minute talk about Shabbos, Kedusha Shabbos, Menucha Shabbos, the how special Shabbos is. What I want people to do is whenever you start Shabbos, when you finish your last activity, the last thing you do before you turn your phone off is you put on this WhatsApp and you listen to a little message of Shabbos. And then you shut off the phone and you go into Shabbos. We'll have a Ben Kodesh. We'll have a break, a 3, 4, 5 minute break where we could think about Shabbos. We will have in our minds, we'll go into Shabbos, we'll greet the Shabbos Queen. We're thinking about Shabbos, feeling ready for Shabbos. Turn us into a switch off. The Chol, go into Shabbos. It will be the switchboard that will turn us around. Maybe this will dry the tears of Shabbos Malchasa, who went into Shabbos, that Shabbos after Lag BaOmer, when it came into Shabbos, greeted Klal Yisrael with tears rolling down her cheeks. And therefore I ask you to join me. The way to do so is by just emailing, going on the email site, email at chafetzchaimtc.com. Email at Chafetz Chaim, CHOFETZ and put in your name and your phone number. And we will add you to the list, the WhatsApp list that's growing. And we're going to start this Erev Shabbos right at the Shavuos. And we're going to Parshas Naso. And we're going to start anew and be able to transform, be the thing that will change. Just walk into Shabbos with a little bit more Kedusha. That's our response. That's the Kiddush Hashem that we're going to do in response to this tragedy. Vayidom Aaron was misnachem, was comforted because his death of his children brought about a Kiddush Hashem. Let's bring about a Kiddush Hashem at the death of these 45 Kedoshei Elyon, and that will bring an incredible nechama to their families who are suffering so much, and maybe a nechama to all of Klal Yisrael as well. And the ultimate nechama we should be zocher, Bila amavis netzach u'mocha Hashem dima mi'al kaponim Hashem could wipe away all the tears of Klal Yisrael and bring an end to the tzaros mishim ma'omol la'olam odai yom l'tzaros adai that HaKadosh Baruch Hu say an end to the tzaros of Klal Yisrael and celebrate together the ultimate simcha u'bias gol tzedek v'shtachvu la'Hashem ba'HaKadosh b'Yerushalayim meher yameinu amen.